My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow the Right Reverend Pellet, the Bishop of London, who, together with the Noble Lady Baroness Tyler of Enfield, who I thank for securing this report, have really covered very clearly the huge issues that it raises. I want to take a broader view, a global view, and then look at some of the structural issues behind the immediate reality in that report. If we look at that global view, the World Health Organization tells us there is a shortage of 5.9 million nurses around the world. That's almost a quarter of the current global workforce, which is almost 28 million. The biggest shortfalls are in low and middle income countries, notably in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia and the Eastern Mediterranean. And I will agree with the Noble Lord, Lord Lilly, that we in the UK should not be taking people from other countries, particularly countries with a nursing shortage. We should be training in the UK more nurses than we need as a wealthy country. That should be our responsibility. Now, the International Council of Nurses says behind the situation of this shortfall are many structural problems, including low pay, poor condition, and remember we're talking on a global scale, inadequate training availability. And I note that McKinsey & Co did a study that found in 5 of 6 nations surveyed, the US, the UK, Singapore, Japan and France, 1/3 of nurses said they were likely to quit in the next year. So this is not a problem simply contained to the UK. Now, of course, COVID is a huge factor here. The WHO estimates about 180,000 healthcare workers died from COVID, many of them no doubt occupationally exposed between January 2020 and May 2021, and many others, of course, would have been harmed by long COVID, the burnout and the mental ill health from the difficult conditions they were facing. But if you look back to a 2021 study, a long-term study by JAMA, a US research network, it found that female nurses were twice as likely as women in the general population to commit suicide. I think is a very disturbing statistic. Now, I think the Noble Lady Baroness Tyler set out very clearly how we have a problem in the UK that the government has stepped up recruitment, but that recruitment is not even keeping up with keeping it at the levels of staffing we have now. And there are aspects of this job that are, of course, enormously, immensely difficult. There's always going to be people needing care at all hours on weekends. It's not possible to ever make this, for many people, a 9-to-5 job. And nurses and midwives have to deal with tremendously difficult situations. I think of hearing a student midwife testifying about being on a work placement and in a delivery room which had just had a stillbirth. And she was left as a student comforting the mother while other professionals in the room looked after the medical needs that needed to be cared for. And we think about the fact that that student midwife now is paying to be in that situation. That's to study as a student midwife, that's what you do, you pay. But my thesis that I want to explore a little today is that the underlying structural issue here is that nursing and midwifery as professions are profoundly undervalued. And that's why we find ourselves in this long-term global situation. And I'm drawing on a report last year from another Royal College of Nursing report titled Gender as Nursing as a Profession, Valuing Nurses and Paying Them Their Worth. And I'll note that in the UK, and I think this is broadly reflected around the world, this is one of the most gender-segregated professions. Only about 10% of nurses are male. And as this report notes, that nursing suffers from a historic construction as a vocation. Individuals, usually women, were seen to enter this because they had a calling, and the salary was almost incidental to that. It enabled them to keep pursuing that calling. It was just enough for that. And we know also that many nurses do feel this, and we know that through the pandemic and at all times they display huge amounts of goodwill, working much beyond their paid hours and in very difficult conditions, often without financial reward. Now, I think we've even got to go further than just thinking about the gendered construction of nursing. The question here is the gender construction of care. As this report, the RCN report that I'm citing says, it says that care is seen as a naturally feminine skill or characteristic that sits opposed to professional skills and qualifications. But caring, of course, being able to care, to show to care for anyone in even the most difficult situation, is an emotional labour. This shouldn't be taken for granted. This should be properly recognised and remunerated. Now, we are in the UK in a particular position to provide potentially global leadership here. We have, of course, a true, the government should like this, I will say that we historically were world leading in the nursing profession. Mary Seacole and Florence Nightingale and many other names I could cite. We helped to establish the global pattern for nursing as a profession. And of course, with the NHS as a large single employer, has the potential to really turn this situation around and truly acknowledge the contribution that nurses and midwives make. Yet, of course, what we've seen over recent years is austerity has suppressed wages, and because we have trade unions heavily suppress their ability to act in the UK, that's also had a huge impact on wages. And I think it's interesting that, as the RCN report notes, there's very little variation in earnings across the nursing workforce among registered nurses, despite the wide range of roles and responsibilities. There is a huge undervaluing of all levels, but particularly at the highest levels. So, my lords, I'm out of time. I did want to comment on how, although men are only about 10% of the profession, they occupy 20% of the highest paid roles. But I'll leave that exploration of that for another day. But I will finish with a little thought experiment for your Lordship's house. Bankers are paid an awful lot more than nurses are. Why?